So welcome. Thank you everyone for coming to this chat on complete communities. My name is Marin Hill and I'm a planner with Montgomery Planning Department. I'm going to be facilitating the discussion today. I'm also joined by several others who've been working on the Complete Communities chapter that is part of the Montgomery County Thrive 2050 General Plan. I'm joined by Jessica McVeary as well as Nick Holdsome, Lauren Stamm, and Jamie Pratt. So they'll all be popping in throughout the chat as well. I'm just going to outline a few rules of engagement before Jessica kicks us off with a brief presentation. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So first, I know that this is a challenging time for all of us. And I just wanted to check in and see how people were feeling. We're all experiencing both our unique individual problems as well as some of our collective challenges. And I just want to invite you to either drop a word in the chat about how you're feeling or just take a second to take a breath and, recognize that this can be a little bit of a challenging time, and we really appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. I also want to recognize that Zoom may be a new technology for some of us. So if you have any questions at any time, you can type them into the chat box, which is found at the bottom center of your screen. You'll see the little, it says chat. And if you click on that, another screen will open up. You can type your questions in there. And you can select Montgomery Planning from the drop-down menu to send us a private chat, or you can send it to the whole group. So that everyone knows this event will be recorded. We've started recording now, and it's going to be posted on our website, which is www.thrivemontgomery.com. All the chat conversations will be saved, and they will be shared with the staff who are working on Thrive Montgomery 2050. So just so you know that all of your chats are public and people will see them. We're going to have everyone muted throughout the meeting, but if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. You can do so by clicking on, you can see on the screen, clicking on the participants icon at the bottom, and there'll be an option at the bottom of the participants window to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you. When we call on you, you'll have to unmute yourself you can do so at the bottom left of your screen, and don't worry, I'll go over all of this again, or by pressing *6 if you're on the phone. Throughout the presentation and the discussion, you can post comments, questions in the chat box. And then during the discussion, we'll start calling on people so that you can say your question or comment out loud. We ask that you be respectful in your comments, and comments that use profane or offensive language will be dismissed. After the presentation, we'd really love to have an open discussion. We'd love to hear from you and your ideas and questions. If you feel comfortable, it would also be great to turn on your camera at that time, because it feels good to know who's in the room. We'll all keep our cameras on throughout the presentation. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and I will turn it over to Jessica to start speaking.
Great, thank you, Marin. Also, thanks to all of you for being here with us today. So some of you may be asking, what is Thrive Montgomery 2050? Well, Thrive Montgomery 2050 is an update to Montgomery County's general plan, which was adopted in 1964 and last comprehensively updated in 1969. A general plan establishes a long-range vision for the county's growth, and in fact, the Montgomery County that we know today, with its vibrant parks, quality schools, desirable urban, suburban, and rural communities, and the agricultural reserve, was shaped decades ago through the 1964 general plan. While the 1964 general plan has served our community well, the rapid social, environmental, technological, demographic, and economic shifts that we have experienced in the last several years, and which have been even more acutely recognized over the last several months, demonstrate that revisions are needed to guide Montgomery County's future growth. Next slide. Thrive Montgomery 2050 envisions that in the year 2050, Montgomery County will be a vibrant and welcoming place where all people thrive with equitable access to attainable housing, healthy food, opportunities for physical activity, parks and open space, employment, education, services, and a variety of travel options. No longer a suburban bedroom community, Montgomery County will have diversity in population, in living and working experiences, in modes of travel, and in natural and built resources. People from all over the world will choose to live, work, grow, and age here. Next slide, please. Specifically in 2050, Montgomery County will be composed of a web of complete communities connected by vibrant corridors. Individual and unique centers of neighborhood activity will include a variety of housing types and price points. Housing is located close to transit, workplaces, needed goods and services, public amenities, and active park spaces. These complete communities will be connected to the rest of the county by two types of corridors: multimodal transportation corridors and green parks, stream valleys, and trails. Next slide, please. So Thrive Montgomery 2050 is organized into 8 categories, all of which contribute to the plan's strategic outcomes of economic health, environmental resilience, and community equity. The focus of our chat today is the complete communities category. Prior to describing how Thrive Montgomery 2050 defines a complete community, we'd like to share several questions for you to consider over the course of our presentation. Please feel free to share your responses in the chat, or when we begin our discussion later, feel free to turn on your video and share your thoughts directly. Questions that we ask you to consider are included in the following slide. So these include, what are some of your favorite things about your neighborhood? What would you be excited to see in your neighborhood that isn't currently there? What is preventing you from meeting your daily needs within a 15-minute walk or bike ride? So Nick has posted these questions in the chat so that you can refer to them throughout the presentation. And we do welcome you to provide your responses either in the chat or later on as we begin the discussion. So now that we've planted the seed to get you thinking a little bit about your own neighborhood or community, we'd like to share with you Thrive Montgomery 2050's vision of a complete community. Next slide, please. So complete communities are places where everyone can live, work, shop, learn, and play. They're easier to walk around. They offer amenities and gathering places, such as parks and libraries, and they allow people to meet their daily needs closer to home. Complete communities will look different in different parts of the county and reflect the urban, suburban, and rural context. At its core, a complete community will be racially, ethnically, and economically diverse, and will include a mixture of housing types, uses, amenities, and services accessible by foot, bike, or transit. Next slide, please. So now that we've told you a little bit about Thrive Montgomery 2050 and shared a bit about complete communities, we'd like to learn a little bit more about all of you. Please respond to the questions in this poll, and we'll share the results with you at the beginning of our discussion. These questions include, do you live in an urban, suburban, or rural part of the county? Do you currently live in a community where you can live, work, shop, learn, and play by walking, biking, or using transit? Do you have convenient social gathering places accessible to you by walking or biking? So again, we'll share the results from all of you at the beginning of our discussion, and we look forward to seeing what those are. Next slide, please. So the staff team has drafted several goals and policies as a starting point for the complete communities category of the plan. We're really interested in your feedback and thoughts on the goals and policies that we're sharing with you today. The Complete Communities chapter includes 4 goals supported by specific policies and actions. We'll summarize each of the goals and the policies during our presentation today, but definitely encourage you to review the full Complete Communities chapter in the draft Goals, Policies, and Actions document available on the Thrive Montgomery website, which has also just been posted in the chat, and to share your feedback. So with that, I'd like to share with you the first goal of the Complete Communities category, which is to retrofit existing communities and create new communities where people can meet their daily needs without a car. This goal represents a fundamental shift from how we have approached land use planning in Montgomery County for the last several decades. The county's growth, particularly following World War II, was primarily auto-oriented and intentionally separated land uses. So home, school, work, and errands were located in distinct places, and it was, and still continues to be in many parts of the county, necessary to drive between these destinations. This pattern of development has resulted in a dependency on the car, which contributes to long commutes, pollution, and public health concerns. So this goal seeks to retrofit existing communities, as well as create new communities where people can meet their daily needs without a car. Next slide, please. This goal is supported by several policies, all of which aim to identify how we can meet daily needs without relying on a car. We've summarized the policies here on the slide for you today, but the full text is available in the draft Goals, Policies, and Actions document that was shared in the chat a few moments ago. So these policies that support Goal 1, they include creating complete communities where people can live, work, play, exercise, shop, learn, and access public amenities and services within a 15-minute walk or bike ride, prioritizing walking and biking in infrastructure investments, allowing various types of housing, and conveniently locating public services and amenities. Next slide, please. While we anticipate that complete communities will share many characteristics regardless of their location, we also anticipate that each complete community will be unique and relatable to their urban, suburban, and rural context. A complete community in the rural part of the county, for example, might be similar to a rural village. Some of the images here could depict what a rural village might look like in the county in the future. Next slide. So the second goal of the Complete Communities category is to orient communities around convenient social gathering places accessible to neighborhood residents by walking and bicycling. The policies that support this goal, which is included on the next slide, really focus on locating and designing public buildings and parks as places where social gathering is encouraged, and also seek to preserve and support existing locations that are currently serving as the center of the community. I'd like to pause here to say that the draft vision, goals, policies, and actions were in the process of being drafted prior to the current pandemic. While the idea of designing communities around social gathering places may not feel appropriate at the moment, we feel strongly that social connectedness is critical to achieving the outcomes of economic health, community equity, and environmental resilience. While our current challenge was certainly unexpected, we're hopeful that we can learn from this experience to create more resilient communities that will allow us to gather, interact, and connect. The third goal in the Complete Communities category, which is shown on the next slide, is to promote active lifestyles by making parks and open spaces a central element of the community. Next slide, please. This goal is supported by a policy that seeks to ensure access to a park or a public space within a 15-minute walk from home to provide opportunity for exercise, social engagement, quiet contemplation, or connection to nature. And the final goal in the Complete Communities category, shown on the next slide, is to equitably distribute the benefits of land use planning and investment throughout the county. The policy that's in support of this goal on the next slide is to eliminate disproportionate adverse impacts affecting communities and avoid creating new adverse impacts from future land use policies and capital investments. As an example, many land use policies in the past have resulted in segregation by race, income, and ethnicity. The land use policies of the future must undo the adverse impacts resulting from decades of land use planning and achieve community equity. This is the last goal and policy in the draft Complete Communities category. To summarize, Thrive Montgomery 2050 seeks to establish complete communities that provide opportunities for people to live, work, play, learn, shop, and so much more within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from their home. These communities will receive equitable investment regardless of their location in the county and will be oriented around parks and social gathering places. So with this brief description of complete communities, we would now like to begin our dialogue. But first, we'd like to share the results of our initial poll so that we can all learn a little bit about each other as well. So it looks as though most of the folks that are on the call today, 78%, live in a suburban part of the county, but that many of those people also live in a place where they can live, work, shop, learn, and play by walking, biking, or using transit. It's also great to see that there's great convenient social gathering places accessible to the folks on the call by walking and biking. So it sounds as though many of you are experiencing complete communities in your daily life today, which is really great to hear. And we'd love to hear a little bit more from you as we begin the discussion about what in your community could be improved, or what in your community could be made even more attractive, or help to sort of fulfill the intent of complete communities even further. So on the next slide, these are some of the things that we were hoping that you would talk with us about, in addition to general feedback on the goals, policies, and actions. Learning a little bit more about some of the favorite things in your neighborhood, what you'd be excited to see in your neighborhood that isn't currently there, particularly for those of you that are living in what might be a complete community today. And also learning a little bit more about what might be preventing you from meeting your daily needs within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Maren to start to facilitate some of this, the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And it looks like people have not had trouble finding the chat. I see questions and comments popping up. So I just want to remind everyone that if you would like to speak out loud verbally, then you'll need to raise your hand to do so. And you can do that by clicking on the participants icon at the bottom and then scrolling to the bottom of the list and selecting raise hand. I know it's a little bit of a process. And then if you're on the phone, if you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 if you've joined by phone. Once you're recognized, you'll need to unmute yourself, which you can do at the bottom of your screen, or by pressing *6 if you've joined by phone. And also we're going to, if you feel comfortable, please have your camera on, and then when you speak, it will come to you. Otherwise, just stay with us. So we got one comment, which I think probably a lot of people have questions about that. When you talked about 15-minute living, what does that include? What does that entail? Does that include driving, or is this just walking and biking?
Thanks
Jessica,
for that question. Yeah, I'll take a shot, and then also ask others to weigh in. I think that it's really going to depend on where you are in the county. In our more urban locations, 15-minute living might be possible by walking or bicycling. In our more rural parts of the county, it might be necessary to drive from your home to a more rural village, where you could then walk around safely and access neighborhood serving retail, access places to work, schools, parks, community facilities. So it might be sort of a combination of both. And I think that, in our more suburban areas, it may be something that you might need to bike for a little bit to get to where you're going, or use a transit option to get to a place where you can access all of your 15-minute living needs. But I really do think that it's going to be something that's contextual based on whether you're in a more urban part of the county or a more rural part of the county.
Thanks, Jessica. Jessica, it's great to know that there's a difference based on context. Another question that we have, this one comes from Sean. Sean says that it's not easy to get enough jobs in the suburban neighborhoods. So talking about a little bit of that job residential balance, especially a diversity of jobs, so jobs for both adults in the household. To increase affordability, increase density in the suburbs is wise, but we have to get folks out of their cars to make that livable for all. So that's Sean's comment, and I think it really connects with the view of complete communities. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that, both getting people out of their cars and that jobs balance?
Sure. I think one thing to start is that this idea of complete communities will clearly take some time to implement. It's not something that will happen overnight. And as we think about the implementation of complete communities, there will be, additional neighborhood level planning that will need to happen, as well as potentially changes to our zoning ordinance to allow uses that are not residential in certain locations to provide those opportunities for jobs in the more suburban parts of the county. So really it's going to be a combination of things that, allowing uses that aren't residential in certain locations to create that complete community that could allow for more jobs and services to happen closer to home. I also think that, our recent experience with the amount of people that are now teleworking, it's currently unknown, what the long-term impacts or sort of opportunities will be from the experience that we're having today. So, perhaps there will be an opportunity for more people to telework, which will allow them to have sort of that 15-minute living, right, that many of us are experiencing today by living and working in the same room. And so that's sort of another consideration. But really, I think that, the fundamental is the notion of allowing sort of reintegration of uses because we have for so many decades really focused on the separation of those uses.
Thanks, Jessica. We received another comment. This one is from Pam Lindstrom. She says that she's not sure if the general plan vision and goals will actually substantially change the vision and goals of master plans as they are amended, and states that complete communities should be urban and transit served. You had talked a little bit about the difference in an urban complete community versus suburban and rural, but would you expand on that?
Sure. I think one thing to mention is that the vision and goals that we're talking about here today, the idea of complete communities, is actually very significantly different from how we have planned for the last several decades. And it's true that, in many of our sort of more transit-oriented locations, we have focused on a mixture of uses, that we've focused on sort of different densities and densities that are appropriate to transit. But outside of those very specific transit nodes, we have focused much more on the idea of preserving and protecting single-family neighborhoods from what we've called commercial encroachment. And that is something that is very prevalent in many of our plans that date from the late 80s and the early 90s. And this idea of complete communities starts to change that a bit because it starts to say where we have transit, where we're planning for transit in places like along some of our major highways that are designated for bus rapid transit, that we start to think about having a mixture of uses and densities that are appropriate to support that level of transit service. So it actually, I do think, will begin to change the vision and goals of master plans, at least how we've looked at them over the last several decades. Maren, I think the second part of the question was related to what will a complete community in an urban area look like versus a suburban or a rural area?
Yeah, so the comment was that, you know, that complete communities should really be urban and connected to transit. So I was wondering if you could expand on the ones that aren't urban and connected to transit, how we see that being a complete community.
Sure. So I think that, you know, we do have a very extensive bus rapid transit network planned that was initially envisioned in the 2013 Countywide Transit Corridors Functional Master Plan. And that's an idea that is being brought forward and embraced in Thrive Montgomery 2050. And we really envision that complete communities in our suburban areas will sort of align with those bus rapid transit corridors and those bus rapid transit stations. But one other thing that's really important to note is that in addition to bus rapid transit, having infrastructure that allow people to safely walk and bike in our suburban areas is also critically important. Today, many of our areas that are within, you know, a mile or a mile and a half of Metro Rail even are difficult to safely access by foot or bike. And so it's really thinking about how we can focus on infrastructure that will allow walking and biking safely to access transit. In our more rural areas, complete communities may look a little bit different. It may still be necessary to drive to a place that would have you know, more of a rural village feel where you could have, you know, small shops or restaurants or public services and amenities. And then sort of once you get there, you can get out of your car. But it also might be something that we rely on something called micromobility or, you know, scooters or shuttles or sort of autonomous vehicles to help, you know, provide that direct connection to higher capacity transit services. I'd also offer any of my colleagues to weigh in on this one as well.
So another thing we've gotten a few questions about, Laura asks about how this plan deals with housing. How does the vision address how we plan and fund affordable housing? And how can MoCo plan and fund housing at different price points throughout the county? And before I turn it back over to Jessica, I do want to just say, and I'll drop the link in the chat, that tomorrow evening we are actually having an event that will be focused solely on housing and how we're addressing housing. It's from 5 to 6 tomorrow evening, and it will be between the planning board chair, Casey Anderson, and our housing planner, Lisa Gavoni, who wrote most of the draft policies that are in the plan. But I'll also turn it over to Jessica to talk about, just to reiterate, how we can plan and fund affordable housing and especially planning for different price points throughout the county.
Sure. I would sort of reiterate that the expert response to that question would come tomorrow with Lisa Gavoni and Chair Anderson. But I will say that one of the things that we're really thinking about in the complete communities category is the notion of thinking about a diversity of housing types. So today, many of the types of housing that we see in Montgomery County are single-family homes, multifamily buildings, which are often you know, apartments or condominiums, and then you know, townhouses. So I see in the chat that there's a reference to missing middle, and the idea of missing middle or a diversity of housing types is that you think about the types of housing that sort of fit in between those categories, that fit between single family, houses and apartment buildings. And that you, you know, start to think about how you can integrate some of those other types of housing units, many of which were sort of much more prevalent in the early 1900s, for example, and you maybe saw these types of houses located close to rail stations. So if you think about things like duplexes or triplexes, small apartment buildings that might have, you know, 5 to 6 units, and then sort of the different types of houses, you know, sort of expand on that range between single family to you know, multifamily units. Having an opportunity to have additional housing diversity can help us with the notion of affordability. When you think about sort of, you know, someone that's just starting out in the housing market, they might not be able to purchase a single family home, or even, you know, one of the townhouses, which are oftentimes, you know, a similar price as a single family home. But they may still want to have an opportunity to purchase a home. And so having this additional housing diversity can help people enter the market and can help to really meet sort of people's different needs. You know, as someone who is, you know, just starting out in their professional career, they might have a different need than a family that has young children, who might have a different need than people who are living in multi-generational housing. And people might also have a different need as they age. And so this idea of housing diversity helps us to meet the needs of people, you know, throughout their lifespan. But definitely tune in tomorrow night, and actually all day tomorrow, I believe, on Twitter for a conversation with our housing planner, Lisa Gavoni.
So a number of these things, you know, require kind of small changes to be implemented, and others require greater changes. Can you talk about how complete communities can be implemented in Montgomery County, either through Thrive, or what other actions would be required?
Sure. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, complete communities are going to be incremental in their implementation. And I think that the idea of complete communities is something that we can sort of more quickly realize in our more urban areas that already have sort of the mixture of uses, that are already sort of more, you know, available for the idea of 15-minute living. But I think in other places that are more single use or that aren't as transit oriented today, that implementation will be incremental and will take time. And I think that, you know, Thrive Montgomery 2050 really establishes for us a very strong policy guidance and framework for us to then work with individual neighborhoods and communities to determine how we can implement complete communities at a neighborhood level scale. So complete communities are really going to be unique to each area of the county, to each neighborhood, and it's going to be important for us to work with those communities and those neighborhoods through subsequent master plans and studies to help begin to identify what a complete community looks like in different parts of the county. So a complete community in Glenmont may look very different than a complete community in Poolesville or Damascus. And figuring out what each of those places will look like will be a partnership with the community through subsequent plans and studies.
Thanks, Jessica. We've gotten a few questions or comments, one from Donna and one from Sean, about amenities and access for folks with physical disabilities, or other, let's see, access for folks with physical disabilities is needed to parks and other gathering places in particular. And Sean mentions, you know, greater access to parks, and also having things like parking spots at parks for folks that can't walk there. So could you speak a little bit both to access of parks and these amenities, but also primarily um, to access for folks with disabilities?
Sure. One of the fundamental components of the complete communities category is the notion that we would have parks and open spaces also accessible within that 15-minute walk, because those places do provide very valuable opportunities for social engagement, for connecting with each other, for exercise, for health, for contemplation. And we really feel as though having a park or an open space within 15 minutes of your home is critical. You have raised an excellent point about thinking about mobility and accessibility. And I think that one of the things that we're striving for is thinking about walking, biking, rolling, making sure that we have the infrastructure in place that will allow people to access these places without having to get in a car. And that is a tall order for us. A lot of work has been done to help get us there, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's going to be a critical component as we think about the implementation of complete communities, is how people can access different amenities within their communities.
Thanks, Jessica. And I'd also, before I pass on the next comment, I'd like to invite people that if you have a comment or question, even if you've already submitted it on the in the chat, if you are willing to read it out loud, we'd love to hear your voices, because it feels less like a chat when Jessica is the only one talking. So we understand it can be a little intimidating. But if you are willing to, you can either send me a message saying, I'll read my question out loud, or just raise your hand and I'll call on you. But either way, we love to hear everyone's voice, diversity of voices, but I'll keep going on. Unless, Donna, would you have any interest in reading your question about working with different neighborhoods?
Yes, if I can remember what my question was. I just think it was going to be very, very important and I don't know how you're going to get the staff to do this, but to work with individual neighborhoods, which are going to be really small groups of people, because our needs and desires are going to be very different. That's just going to be very important. And so I'm sorry I have not read this part of the plan. Bad. So maybe that's in there, but I don't know how you're going to do that. But that's really important. I just want to make that point.
So you're getting the Cliff Notes version here, which is good. But I think I'll start and then I'll ask Maren to weigh in as well. And I think that you're right. And this is, I don't want to, I feel like I can't emphasize enough how incremental this will be, because it won't be a notion of our staff team undertaking complete communities at a county-wide scale. It will be something that happens over the course of several years in working with communities just the way that we do today through our master plans, our sector plans, our studies. And it will be very incremental to help us get there. But, really having genuine engagement with the communities will be critical to help us in implementing this vision. Maren, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah. So, Donna, I don't think you are alone in not having read the entire draft. So that's totally fine. So in addition to this chapter, one thing that we have recognized as we've been working on this is that there are lots of changes that we need to make to how we do outreach and engagement. We believe firmly in engaging with the communities that we work with. And, both through the pandemic, we found that we need to expand how we're doing that. And then I think once we're able to meet back in person again, you know, kind of augment our traditional way of doing things and make it so that more folks have the ability to participate virtually, in person, and that we do that by finding out where people are going and how best to communicate with them. So in another chapter, in the connectedness chapter, we actually have some work items that we're recommending that are really us setting a strategy about how we are going to do engagement and coming up with a community engagement plan that will kind of direct us in the future as we work on master plans, as we work on development projects, to make sure that we're doing meaningful engagement. But I think you're totally right, and part of it is identifying the community leaders that are working with large groups of people. And, you know, you're also right that it is a staff is a huge constraint, and, you know, figuring out how we maybe can work with communities to do a better job, or how we can collaborate in ways that will make our staff hours go a little bit further. But hopefully some of that will be addressed in future work program items. Thank you for having the courage to speak out loud also. I really appreciate it. Everyone give Donna a thumbs up. Let's see, we also, Pamela Lindstrom, would you like to speak? I can unmute you, and if you would not, then I can just ask the question for you. All right. Oh, it looks like Pam's coming on. Pam, we can't hear you if you're speaking, but I do see that you're unmuted. I can read it out loud, and then if we get the audio working, then you can follow up. So Pam had a follow-up on the question that she asked earlier, which was about the future plans really carrying out the vision of Thrive Montgomery. And she said that she's looked at the Shady Grove plan, and she doesn't think that it implements the interpretation of this complete communities. Would you be able to speak about the Shady Grove plan just briefly, and how that fits in with Thrive, and maybe the timeline of this plan versus that plan?
Sure. Thanks for that comment. We initiated the Shady Grove plan quite a while ago. I think probably about 18 months ago, and so, you know, the timing of the Shady Grove plan and also the structure of that plan are a bit different than the general plan update. The Shady Grove sector plan was actually initiated really to focus on how we think about staging and how we approach staging, particularly with many of the sort of public amenities that were envisioned in the 2006 plan being implemented, and whether or not the staging was still needed. So that was a very technical scope of work that really sought to kind of refine what was envisioned in the 2006 sector plan. And it didn't necessarily you know, include this idea of complete communities, because this is a new idea that we're coming up with through the Thrive Montgomery 2050 plan, and isn't something that we're sort of weaving into other planning processes at the moment, because we want to make sure that we hear from the community, that we hear from all of you, that we hear from the planning board, and ultimately that we hear from the county council on, you know, whether or not this is an idea that we should pursue through the general plan, through the sort of the ultimate approved and adopted general plan. The other thing that I would say is I don't entirely agree that that Shady Grove is not representative of a complete community. It's really thinking about how we can introduce density, how we can achieve density at the Shady Grove Metro Station, and include a mixture of uses. You know, how we can think about a combination of residential development, how we can think about neighborhood serving retail, how we can think about improving walking and biking access to the Metro Rail station, how we can think about sort of you know, reusing places that are currently underutilized. And really sort of begin to grow the community that has started to grow there since the approval of the 2006 plan. I'd also say that we're beginning our work sessions with the Shady Grove sector plan, we'll be meeting with the planning board over the course of the summer on that plan, and certainly welcome your involvement in those planning board sessions. And ultimately, as we move forward to council, certainly welcome your thoughts on the plan as well.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Jane, I see you have a couple of questions. Would you like to ask them out loud, or I can read them? I've asked to unmute you. If you don't unmute yourself, I'll just go ahead and ask them.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I will also take my video on. Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here today. And sorry again that I had to join late. I guess my first question was that it makes sense to me that complete communities look different in urban versus suburban versus rural contexts. But if there should be some sort of baseline for what we consider a complete community, something like the affordability of housing or healthy food, there's been a lot of talk about parks and all of those things that I think a lot of us would agree are really important. And so although it makes sense to me to sort of work with the community to figure out for them what is the best fit for their neighborhood, it seems like we should have some sort of standard for and goals that we're working towards. And then my second question was building off of that. What happens when we're talking with a community, especially one that has benefited from something like exclusionary zoning, and they say, we're not interested in becoming a complete community, we're not interested in the changes that are necessary to bring a different, a more expansive array of incomes into our neighborhood. How do we weigh what the neighborhood wants versus the goals of the public good that are outlined in Thrive 2050?
Those are excellent questions. I'll start by talking a little bit about the shared characteristics with complete communities. I think one of the things that when we started with this idea of complete communities, we talked a lot about the differences, and then we realized that it's hard for us to sort of start with the differences because we really need to be thinking about the context or sort of the specifics that are associated with each neighborhood to kind of begin to think about what a complete community might look like in different places. So we realized pretty quickly, though, that one thing that we should be doing is identifying the characteristics that are shared across complete communities, regardless of where they are located. And so for us, we envisioned that complete communities would include a mixture of uses, a diversity of housing types, parks, trails, and open spaces. Each complete community would have safe and comfortable walking, rolling, and biking access to destinations, and would integrate nature, arts, and culture into the streets, buildings, and infrastructure. We also envisioned that complete communities would provide access to food, healthcare, education, and public transportation. Your question about sort of what if we run into to neighborhoods that aren't really interested in having a complete community is a good one. And I certainly anticipate that throughout the implementation of this plan that we will have many of those conversations. Because for so long we have really sort of planned our communities around this idea of separating home from work, from services, from amenities. And so in some ways we're talking about a pretty significant cultural shift in locations, particularly those that are transit accessible. And so that's really going to be something that is a challenge. But I think that sort of the foundation, the place that we're starting, is sort of having this conversation through the general plan. The general plan is setting our sort of, the vision, the guiding framework, the guiding policy that will then happen through subsequent plans, policies, and studies. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of work. And there may be times where where it becomes political in some senses, you know, that plans may need to move forward to the planning board and council to comply with the overall vision that's been established, and that we'll have to work with our appointed and elected officials as well as our community members to really achieve this vision over time.
Great, thank you, Jessica. And I think this question builds nicely. This is from Oma, and builds nicely off of that. What are the elements of a complete community or shared community? What are the shared elements? Oma asks, do you envision more sidewalks in neighborhoods, or with less traffic and more trees and walkable streets? Is that part of the complete community's vision?
Yes, I think that is going to be critical. The idea that you can leave your home and that you can walk to a restaurant, or you could bike to a restaurant, you could, you know, walk to your library, safely walk to school. Having the infrastructure to be able to do that, whether on foot or bike, or, you know, trying to get to transit, is going to be critical to really achieve complete communities as we've envisioned in this draft document.
It's always a challenge to get to that unmute button in time. One question that we received is about schools and how this plan relates to schools. So a lot of times I think when we think about complete communities and the amenities and community facilities that we want in them, people think about schools. How will this plan influence the actions of the school board, or will it have any impact on schools? Could you talk about that relationship? And this will be our last question, and then we will let you know about some next steps.
Sure, thank you. So Thrive Montgomery 2050 is a comprehensive policy document in its reach, and it does include recommendations that impact schools as well as other community facilities. And through collaboration with multiple county agencies like Montgomery County Public Schools, Thrive Montgomery 2050 recommends policies and actions that impact the design, placement, and co-location of public facilities like schools. And Thrive Montgomery's Thrive Montgomery's focus on complete communities includes recommendations that enhance the walkability of schools. It also recommends creating new locations for future schools by using smaller infill sites or adapting former office buildings given the limited availability of land. And then policies and actions related to schools will be implemented through schools facility planning and capital budget decision-making by the school board and the county council. But the other thing that I would say with regard to schools is that complete communities really focuses on this idea of co-location, or how we can have public amenities and services located right next to each other or in the same building. So for example, you know, having a school that also has a medical clinic or has a daycare facility, or you know, has some other kind of service or amenity that the county, or excuse me, that residents can access conveniently within their community is a very important part of the complete communities category.
Great, thank you, Jess. And thank you everyone who came and participated and sent us in a comment or a question. As I mentioned, these comments and questions will be shared with other staff who are working on the general plan update. We'll also have this PowerPoint available on our website, as well as a recording of the event. So if there's someone that you'd like to see this, you can pass it along. It will be on our site. So just to give you a heads up on our project timeline, we are right where it says we are here. We just presented, or oh no, we're actually below that, but we haven't updated the slide. So we're actually under the draft policies and actions. These were presented to the planning board on June 11th. And then staff will be going back to the planning board to present the working draft, which is the full draft plan in September. And then we'll be having a planning board hearing in later in the fall. And then work sessions with the planning board, so where they'll be revising it. So there's still opportunities to send in comments, to have conversations with staff before it's reviewed by council in April of next year. All right, next slide. So if you want to stay involved and you want to stay in touch with us, you can sign up for our e-newsletter, which just has emails about the events or upcoming milestones in the plan. You can also communicate with us through Thrive 2050 at montgomeryplanning.org, send comments and questions, and we have a number of staff who respond to those. You can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And as I mentioned, as we mentioned, tomorrow on Twitter, we'll be talking about all things housing. Lisa Gavoni is going to be manning our Twitter account and talking about the policies that we are recommending as part of this plan, as well as sharing some data and trends. So we'd love to hear your thoughts or your questions tomorrow on Twitter. We're having these chats throughout the rest of the month. So you can see up here tonight, there's actually another one. And then tomorrow we have the all-day Twitter extravaganza on housing, and we'll have a virtual happy hour where you can feel free to come with your housing questions and comments, and also your favorite mocktail or cocktail, and hang out with Casey Anderson and Lisa Gavoni and Partop Firma. And then we'll have 2 next week. So we'd love to have your participation. We also understand that this can be a big commitment to come to these. So feel free to send us emails with additional questions. So I think if there's nothing else, we appreciate your questions and comments, and feel free to follow up with us. Thank you so much for coming.